I'd like to start this off by affirming that I am a huge Beatles fan, as well as being 14 years old. I'm also an avid collector of Beatles stuff. I was even there at their first concert. They have great music and great talent. I have their albums, t-shirts, and other assorted items. I even enjoy the old cartoon of the Beatles that was made in the 60s. But it wasn't long before I found out there was a morbid secret to the cartoon. I was at a local collector shop when they had a section about the Beatles. I was looking for some Beatles mugs and pins. I bought 2 Beatles mugs and 4 Beatles pins, and I was just about to leave the section when something caught my eye. It was a videotape called The Lost Beatles Cartoon, or at least that's what I assumed. Being what was scribbled on it, with what appeared to be black Sharpie, I really wanted to get it, so I told my disjointed mother that I wanted to buy it. When we went to purchase the tape, the counter worker said that I couldn't have it. He told me that he watched it and had nightmares. I was surprised he could say that about the tape because it was just the Beatles. How can a cartoon about a band possibly be that scary? But he said, "Never mind, you're just gonna have nightmares anyway," and gave me the tape. While I was walking away, I thought I saw him folding his hands like he was praying. For some odd reason, I was starting to feel like something was wrong with the tape. When I got home, I immediately went downstairs to watch this mysterious video. When the tape started to play, something weird happened in the beginning. It was the sounds of someone screaming in complete agony, which, while that was normal for the Beatles cartoon, there was usually a title card accompanying it. I was scared until the title card thankfully faded in a few seconds later. The episode was called Because, and I assumed it was referring to the Abbey Road song Because. The first scene faded in from black, but something was off. It was slightly different than the original style. It looked almost similar to the original, but it looked darker and more detailed. Then the episode showed all 4 Beatles in their trademark grotesque original designs: John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Despite the past oddity, I relaxed hearing the trademark Paul Frees and Lance Percival voicing the Fab Four. They were talking about some kind of a CD they found outside the recording studio and about listening to it. This was strange, as CDs weren't invented until 1976 and the show was produced in the late 60s. So then the scene suddenly transitioned to the Beatles in their recording studio. The shot showed John casually putting the headphones on until the thing happened. John all of a sudden just looked like he just blacked out. Then Paul worriedly asked, "John, are you alright?" Then the scene zoomed up to John, who had started drooling. All of a sudden, John's eyes turned into what I can only really describe with my limited vocabulary as an LSD acid trip image with weird colors. After 10 seconds of John's acid-tripping face, something appeared. I grabbed the clicker and went backwards to see what it was. What I saw was a morbid, grotesque picture. It was a real photo of a man with a ventriloquist dummy. The scary part of the picture was that the man with the dummy had no mouth. Instead, there was blood on his face where his mouth was supposed to be. The dummy had fire in his eyes and an insane smile. I had to choke back some vomit after watching it. Then the screen went back to an equally as vomit-inducing sight, John's face. "Are you alright?" asked Ringo.
"Seeing is not believing. Seeing is killing,"
John said in a dull monotone, as though he was in some sort of trance. John soon snapped back to reality, shaking his head, and replied, Yes, I am. What time is it, George?"
"It's 1:13.
George answered nonchalantly. Then the screen went black and blood started to rain down. But this blood looked much more realistic than anything else that I'd seen in any other episode. It looked so real that if I touched the screen, I would somehow get blood on my fingers. The blood rain soon disappeared, and another scene soon faded in, showing the Beatles walking to a lake. A crowd of girls soon started chasing the guys for almost a minute, when all of a sudden, a picture of a girl with no eyes appeared on the screen. It was an actual black and white picture of a person, with just her eye sockets dripping with blood. She had no teeth and more blood was pouring out of her mouth. I jumped back on my couch after seeing it. Then the screen went to John's face. And all of a sudden, the screaming of the fans stopped. And when all 4 of them turned around to check, all of them were on the ground, burning to a crisp. Paul, clearly petrified, asked, What happened?" Then the scene showed Ringo vomiting out red vomit with chunks of brown meat. Something caught my eye. I paused and looked closely at the vomit, and there was the face of Hitler. I was so much shocked that a man who killed millions of people and soldiers was in a cartoon about the Beatles.
Just forget about it,
John sharply shouted back. But what about our fans?
I don't give a fuck!
I was shocked that this episode involves John saying fuck, but I decided to continue on. The next scene showed a building that was about to be demolished. The Beatles were walking down the street where the wrecking ball hit the building. A piece of rubble went flying in the air. It was about to miss a person when John did something despicable. In typical John fashion, he proceeded to push the man back to where the piece of rubble was about to fall. In a second, the piece of solid marble crushed the guy to death. Blood and brain matter flew everywhere. Even though the brain matter and blood still looked cartoonish, it was still pretty horrible. A crowd of people quickly surrounded the scene, and the scene zoomed up to John with an evil smirk on his face. The next scene only showed just the black screen. The only thing that could be heard was a gunshot. Then there was smoke that I assumed represented the fired gun. Then the screen faded back into a shot of the recording studio. The studio had no lights on, causing the screen to be too dark to make anything out. But there was a quiet mumbling, and I listened closely to hear someone dully whispering,
I shouldn't have done that. They're going to know soon.
Then one light went on. There was a shadow outside the door. It was the form of John. It wasn't long until the light was reflecting to the sound manager in the recording booth. Dead. I quickly put two and two together and figured that the man was shot by John, who had a gun for whatever reason. The camera zoomed up to the ground outside the room. A model M1887 fell to the ground with blood splattered on it, and with bits of smoke still coming out of the barrel. The next scene suddenly showed Paul, George, and Ringo knocking on John's room door. Then Ringo proceeded to bust down the door with his trademark strong, sexy insect legs, and there was a humongous safe that was the size of an SUV. They didn't know what the combination was, but for some reason, it wasn't locked up all the way. They opened it up, and they found out John's secret. He was a Satanist. There was a dead body of a woman on a pentagram drawn in her blood, and with her eyes gouged out. There were dead animals, a fan-made Necronomicon, and goat's skull on a pentagram. In fear, George fell to the ground. Paul had to choke back vomit. Ringo ran over to the corpse and yelled out, Jenny, me fiancé, no! He then slumped to the ground, closing his eyes. Then Ringo started crying in a sad way. The crying from Ringo didn't sound like a normal cartoon crying. It sounded as real as day. And in a shock, I found out that the dead woman was Ringo's fiancée, Jenny. I didn't know that Ringo had a fiancée, but I decided to continue on. Suddenly, some distorted screams of a girl started to play in the background. I started to suspect that's supposed to be the screams of Jenny. The screen went black. On the screen showed the view of the sun setting from John's legs. The screen immediately went to John's face, that had a mad expression and a rapid moving mouth. He had red in his left iris. His dick looked like it was ripped by a rabid raccoon. He had a noose around his neck. He was about to commit suicide. He shut his eyes and jumped. The camera showed John's feet still swinging. The camera zoomed out to show John's lifeless body hanging on the small cliff on the lake that the Beatles were going to in the beginning of the episode. The screen went black and Paul appeared in a sad expression, and the screen went black again. And then the scary part begins. Without warning, Paul's face appeared with hyper-realistic eyes. There were so many camera views of Paul's face like a zoom out of him in the corner. Then pictures appeared. I remember seeing a picture of a hand with a gun in it, and the gun was pointed to a little boy's head, but the gun was already fired. Another picture flashed onto the screen of a garfish in the river. The next picture was a burnt town. People were on the ground, dead. Quickly, I discovered that the town was destroyed during an attack. It was destroyed because of the Vietnam War. The next picture was 3 undertakers with 7 coffins with little children no younger than 6. And behind the left undertaker was coffin with a hand coming out of it. And the hand was moving. After more pictures, it shows Paul with the same expression that he had before the scary slideshow. Then suddenly, I heard a loud booming voice of a low, quiet voice saying, "Do it!" Then an M1911 Colt pistol appeared in Paul's hand. He puts it in his mouth and pulled the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter went everywhere, like on the grass and the cliff. And the camera zoomed up to the capsule of the bullet that shot Paul. It said, "Your life was already over, Paul," in a mysterious Russian accent. The next scene showed George on a cliff from the same lake John committed suicide. He was about to commit suicide too. I thought he was going to jump off the cliff, but instead, he pulled out a gun and shot himself. Very anticlimactic. At the end of the scene, the camera zoomed into the gun, and the gun was the same one Paul used to commit suicide. And on the side it said, "It takes 2 bullets to kill 2 Beatles." It scared me a little bit. It sent chills down my spine. I mean, guns can't talk. The next scene showed Ringo in the hospital, dying of an unknown disease. He took the picture of him and his fiancée and the engagement ring he gave her, and then he died. Then the scene faded, while the ending music played. After about a minute, another shot faded in. It appeared to be in a dark hall. All I heard was screams, whistles, yelling, and gunshots. I soon found out the hall was in a prison. The scary part was that every time the lamp swings in the hall, a black hooded figure appeared. It wasn't long until I found out it was John with gray skin and a red iris. He shouted,
I hope you enjoyed your life, because my life is over, including my friends, all because of me, John.
Right behind him was a crowd of guards and prisoners. It seems that some of them had bullet holes in their heads and blood all over their bodies. In the crowd, I can make out several people in grotesque Beatles cartoon designs, like John F. Kennedy, Abraham Lincoln, and Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. The really weird part was that the prisoner that was right next to John was Mark David Chapman. It scared me how the guy who killed the actual John Lennon was right behind the evil cartoon John. For 30 seconds, Mark Chapman and the crowd of prisoners and guards started walking straight like if they were walking towards me. The more they kept walking, the more blood they seemed to get on themselves. Then the episode finally ended. I went backwards and kept rewinding the opening credits to believe how stupid I was to believe there could ever be a nice episode of the Beatles cartoon. It wasn't long until something caught my eye. I looked closely at the bottom of the word because, and I paused to see that the episode was actually called Because of John, They're Dead. I was about to take the tape out until the VCR suddenly caught on fire. I immediately got my grieving mom and a fire extinguisher. We put out the fire and to discover that somehow the VCR was still okay because we put in more tapes and they managed to work. But the only thing that was destroyed by the fire was the tape, and it was the tape that started the fire. My disappointed mother and I went back to the collector's shop and bought the tape back. The counter worker for the store asked, "What happened to the tape?" "It was on fire when the tape ended," I said. He roughly grabbed the tape out of my little hands and violently chucked it in the trash bin. All I can say is, goodbye, and see you later.